If you have not done so already, go ahead and take out your notebooks. You can go ahead and close your laptop or other distracting electronics. Let's get this party started. Don't worry, we're not going to do all 2,240 years. We're going to only do about like 1,970 years. So go back a little bit. Okay, so take your notebook. In order to do chemistry, you have to figure out where chemistry comes from, where science comes from. We're going to take it back a ways. Carlos, please put your phone out of sight, out of mind. All right. So let's start off with this. Further away. You can see it. It's distracting you right now. Okay. So, where does thunder come from?
The sky.
The sky. Why?
Clouds rub together and it creates a sound.
We'll go with that. Clouds rub together to create a sound. It's actually like clouds falling back together after the lightning bolt passes through. Where did the ancient Norse people believe thunder came from?
Gods.
Which god? Norse. Thor was up there pounding on an anvil, and that was making sparks and noise. Where did the ancient Greeks think thunder came from? Zeus was angry, so he was throwing some thunderbolts on him. Let's suppose a Nordic ship cruised down the coast as a Greek ship went out the Mediterranean and encountered each other 400 years ago. How would they settle where thunderbolts actually came from? They would probably fight it out. They would probably not have a reasoned set of arguments as this is why it's definitely got to be Thor. They would just be like, Thor, no, Zeus, rah, and they would just hit each other in the face. And whoever was still standing after they hit each other in the face a bunch of times, oh, that proves that our God was more powerful because we won. So for a long time, we settled disputes with war and some of our boards not working properly. And so for a long time, we settled things with war, with the philosophy, might makes right. If we are stronger, therefore we are correct. This was not a very productive way of organizing the world. And at some point, we stopped believing in mythological explanations and started trying to get more scientific in our things. All right, myth and war as the dominant forces in the world for maybe 100,000 years. When did we stop explaining things with myth and start maybe trying to be scientific about things? Yeah.
Like the Renaissance?
Before the Renaissance. There was two waves that are part of Western culture that happened first. Middle Ages. There was not a lot of great science happening in the Middle Ages. Go back before that, what do you go to? The classical era. What was the first classical civilization that did rational argumentation explanations? The Greeks. If you go back to ancient Greece, something like 400 years BCE. By the way, that's the new hip way of doing BC. Instead of having it be based on one religion, you say before the Common Era. The dates are aligned, but we don't use BC anymore. We add a little E to be hipper. Okay. In 400 BCE, in Athens, the people in Greece were doing a lot of trading and things like that. And they would go up here and trade with the Bulgarians. They'd go over here and trade with the Italians. They'd go all the way down here and trade with people in Africa. And they would notice that people in different parts of the world had a different god to explain where thunder came from a little bit. But what was unusual is the people up in the northern European areas, their gods were all white and blonde, and the people in Italy, their gods all looked Italian, and the people in Africa had gods that had dark skin. It's oh, maybe each region just kind of comes up with their own gods, sort of based on themselves, and that's where their gods are from. How could we settle this? Rather than fight, we just want to trade with you. We just want to know how much lamb skins for this incense or whatever it is that they were trading. We don't want to fight it out. Let's maybe try rational discussion as a crazy new idea for settling disputes about things. And this rational discussion stuff, we could try and apply it to why the universe is and how it works. And these were the first people to start doing philosophy. Philo means what? As in Philadelphia or Anglophile. Anybody know what that word root means? Brother is in there. What is Philadelphia? The city of?
Brotherly love.
Brotherly love. And the philo means love in there. And then sophis was truth or wisdom. That we're not going to have our allegiance to some God. We're going to have our allegiance to the truth. It was a radical idea that happened back in ancient Athens thousands of years ago. We don't know exactly why this little tribal culture started doing that, but it has been a great benefit to all of us that they sort of got this party started. The first philosopher that we're going to focus on is a guy named Democritus. Based on his name, what would you suppose he came up with? Democracy would be a good guess, but this isn't social studies class, this is science class. And instead of democracy, he asked this question: can matter be split infinitely? Can matter be split apart infinitely? If I take this piece of paper and I tear it in half, that's pretty easy. If I tear it in half again, no problem. Can I do this forever? Not just my fingers, but just theoretically, if I have lasers and stuff, how far down can I divide things? Can I go forever? Okay, let's start with paper. What's the smallest bit of paper that I can cut a paper into? Paper is made from what material? Wood. What's the smallest bit of a wood plant? A cell. I can divide this down to a cell. Can I split a cell apart? Yeah. What can I break a cell into? Half. What comes spilling out of a cell if I break it in half? Organelles. Come on, Golgi apparatus. And mitochondria. Can I break an organelle apart? Yes. If I break an organelle apart, what does it break into? Half an organelle. Whatever you have these, I'm just going to feed it to you and say proteins. Can I break proteins apart? What do they break down into? No? Amino acids. Let's make it easier to spell and write molecules. Okay. Can I break molecules apart? Yes. What do they break apart into? Atoms. Can I break atoms apart? Yes, I can. What do they break apart into? Protons, neutrons, electrons. Can I break protons and neutrons, electrons apart? Yes, I can. Into quarks. Can we break quarks apart?
No. Yes.
We don't know. We have not gotten the super collider to focus in enough yet to try to split a quark. This question that Democritus first proposed 2,300 years ago is still an open question. Is matter infinitely subdividable? Can you split it forever? We don't know the answer. That is some ways a philosophical question. We've made a lot of steps since Democritus' time, but that is still an open question. Democritus didn't have a super collider in Switzerland to toy with. He thought about clay cones. He said if you have a cone made of clay and you come in with a sharp wire and you cut it, the surface area of this cone exactly matches the surface area of that tap cone there. So that he thought that at some microscopic level that they couldn't see, that it had to be matching there, but splittable someplace else. That there were little bits along the edge that maybe, human eyes could not detect, but there had to be some place where it was able to be split. Like here. Oh, it's supposed to be a different color to make it easy for people. Supposed to be someplace you could split it, and other places where you could not split it. And he said the word to cut or to split in ancient Greek was the verb tomos. And if we want to say something is not able to be something, what do we do to say something is not? To change the word to a not. If you want to say it's not credible, you say it is not uncredible, but incredible. We generally put some vowel, or unbelievable or anti-hero. We put a vowel sound at the beginning of a word to say not that word. Okay, Anakin Skywalker ends up going against his family. Against, again, the Ana means against. Okay, so in ancient Greece, they put an A in front of a word to say not cuttable. Democritus was the first person to say that there's some fundamental uncuttable grain to the universe that you can't divide, and that was the first person to use the word atom. Okay? An atom is a word that Democritus coined to say there is some grainy nature to the universe. That at some point there is a hard stop, and you can't keep dividing it forever. That is a philosophical question. Most of you have probably not heard of Democritus before today. Tell me another ancient Greek philosopher you have ever heard of. Socrates. That book right there has Socrates quoted about 4,000 times in this book. Wherever it says SOC, that's Socrates. Who is that book written by, Eli? Plato. Okay. Let's talk about these two famous Greek philosopher people. Socrates was just a guy in Athens. He'd been a soldier. I forget exactly. He was a stonemason. And his friend went to the oracle at Delphi. And the oracle, he asked the oracle, who's the smartest person in Athens? And the oracle said it's Socrates. And Socrates was like, what? I'm just a regular stonemason. I'm not the smartest guy in the city. Take, for instance, my friend Teddy over here. He's way smarter than me. Teddy is in charge of some, we'll say the military. Teddy's a military guy. He's much smarter than me. He knows all about, Teddy, what makes a good military division? Teddy would talk for a while, and Socrates would be like, but wait a minute, what about this other thing? And they'd be like, oh, you're right, I didn't think of that. And what Socrates turned out to be really good at was asking questions. And it wasn't that he knew more than others, but he knew his own limitations. What he found as he walked around Athens was that other people claimed to know things that they didn't really know. And Socrates would be like, I don't know anything about military. I don't know anything about this. But the mayor would be like, oh, I know a lot of things about stuff. And Socrates would be like, oh, yeah? Mr. Mayor, what makes a great city? It's like that which makes its people happy. He's like, well, if we just gave everybody wine, they'd be all super happy. Would you say that that's a good city if it made all its inhabitants drunk all the time? Like, well, no, Socrates, of course not. That's not what I mean. But that sort of questioning to reveal that someone doesn't know what's up is still today called the Socratic method. You have a teacher that teaches by asking questions back and forth. It's still named for Socrates because he was so good at questioning others. Questions for others. So Socrates became known for this, of sitting in the marketplace, talking to the various ministers and leaders of the town, and revealing that they didn't know things that they thought they knew. And young men of the town loved to watch this, to watch Socrates make the town leaders look dumb. That was what he was really good at. So they'd follow him, and they would start to imitate him, and they'd go home and be like, so Mom, what really is a clean room anyway, when their mom told them to clean the room, and they would try out this Socratic back and forth stuff. So what did the town leaders think of Socrates? They didn't really like him. They put him on trial for being a public nuisance. And Socrates, of course, chose to defend himself in trial and be like, so what is a public nuisance? Was you. And so they found him guilty, and he's like, so what is guilt? And so they then offered him to pick his own punishment. And he said, for what I've done for the city of Athens, for showing you guys what you really know and what you still need to figure out, you should give me dinner for the rest of my life. You should house me on the city's expense, because I have helped you understand what is true and what you still need to figure out. And they're like, you are so annoying, Socrates. We're going to kill you in 3 weeks, but we're not going to guard your house. So what did they really want him to do? They wanted him to just leave. They wanted him to stop being annoying. I mean, they didn't really want to kill him. They're like, we'll kill you in 3 weeks. We're not going to guard you. We'll be back. Because they just wanted him to leave. They wanted him to go into exile. But he's like, I am a citizen of Athens, and I've lived by the laws of Athens my whole life. And if you really think that's the law, then you're going to have to follow through on that. I am not leaving. He was that dedicated to truth, and what we say we're going to do, we're actually going to know it or we don't know it. And so he died. He was a martyr, died for truth. And on the one hand, we're all like laughing, like you died, but we're talking about him today, and they're not talking about us. You know, like he stood out in history for this guy who said, words matter, and what you say matters, and if you really say something, you have to know it or not know it. The interesting thing about Socrates, although we're talking about him now, is that he didn't write anything down. All he did was hang out in the market and ask questions. Almost everything we know about Socrates comes from one of the young men of Athens who hung out and watched him, and that young man's name was? Plato was certainly mentored by Socrates. And Plato wrote plays. They read like a dialogue. Socrates said this, and then Crito said this, and then Athenaeus says this. And you can see I've got those. I was hoping you guys pass that around a little bit. So these are books. That whole book is plays, like 26 plays written by Plato in which Socrates is the character. Socrates is main character. And so we don't really know which idea came from Socrates and which idea came from Plato. Because sometimes it might have been a real thing that Socrates said, and sometimes he might have just used Socrates to like present one of his new ideas. We know he isn't totally mythological. Other Athenian writers talk about, and then that crazy Socrates down in the garden said this today. Like, so he's a real person, but exactly was he as witty as he comes across in like Socrates in Plato's stories? We don't know. Plato was more intentionally like, I'm a philosopher. I'm writing books. I'm writing plays. People are producing these plays. He has a school. He teaches other people in his school. Plato has kind of one prized student, and that prized student is the third Greek philosopher that most people know, and that is? Nope. Aristotle. Aristotle was a student of Plato's. Aristotle is, all three of these people are sort of like the father, grandfather, and great-grandfather of like most of Western thought. Aristotle wrote books, and he has his, what's actually survived most are his lecture notes. Aristotle like taught schools, like, all right, this is, you know, what we know about a proper society in terms of ethics. This is what we know about how humans can know things and not know things. This is what we know about like what is justice. And so he has like a presentation on that, and we have his lecture notes that have been turned into like essays. So he really like, presents on a lot of stuff. Interestingly, Aristotle has a star student as well. He is hired to be the tutor for a prince from Macedonia, whose name is translated to us now as Alexander. What did Alexander go on to do? He was the great. What did he do? Took over Europe. Conquered Asia. So if you have if your tutor is one of the smartest people in history, then you can go on and do great things. Alexander doesn't leave any like great philosophical treatises. He's too busy conquering the known world. Like I said, Aristotle lecture notes. The first Western genius maybe is a way to like talk about Aristotle. Most of Western thought is subsequent to Aristotle. There's a branch of philosophy called metaphysics. It's called metaphysics because meta in ancient Greek means after, and it was the chapter after physics in his book. And so like domains of knowledge are named based on how Aristotle organized his chapters. He was a pretty influential dude. This is, you know, one guess as to what he looked like. The thing that we're going to focus on most, that most of you know, but you don't know it's Aristotle, are the four elements. Aristotle proposed that the world is made of what four elements? Earth, fire, water, and air. And whether it's because you watched Avatar as a kid or because you collect Pokemon cards, like you know these four Aristotelian elements is like, oh, and then the water demon fights the fire demon. Like, it's in our culture. That was Aristotle's idea. Okay? He was the first one to divide things up this way. And he said that everything is made of these four elements. Okay? And if we take a person, we notice that they are warm. They have some like fiery heat to them. And if we cut them open, some liquidy water comes out. But that water has dissolved minerally earth in it. And let's see, we've got to get some more earth. Air. So they need to breathe. in order to stay alive as a person. They're exchanging air or else they don't survive. If you look at a tree, if you take a tree and it needs water and sunlight to grow, after you cut it, the fire comes back out of it. When you put it in the fire, it releases its fire. And what's left over after the fire, all that sunlight has gone out of the plant? It's some dry ashes. It's earth again. Right? So there's some mixture of these things by which you can make everything. Everything is made of those four elements. And it depends on like the mixture, the ratio that makes one thing what it is. Birds have more air in them, so they're able to fly. Like there's just a little bit more of one of those four things. This is all air stuff. Everything is made of four elements. If that's true, and you have the four elements, what can you do? You can make things. You can make anything. If you could make anything, what would you want to make? No, they didn't have the idea of making flying cars. What is something that they would want? Gold. Okay? The idea was then you should be able to make gold. Okay? Gold is something that they would want to have. Okay? And so the question is, oh, we can make gold. What kind of material is gold?
Metal.
It's a metal. It's a shiny, soft metal, fairly malleable, pretty dense. And says, you know what's another shiny, soft, malleable, pretty dense metal? Is lead. And so lead is close, and they called lead a base metal, and they thought it just needed to evolve up a little bit, and they could turn it into gold. And they were like, all right, Aristotle, who's super smart and super influential about everything else, says that we can do this. Let's get in the lab and do this. And what was that pursuit in the lab called? Alchemy. Which is the first people to start doing what we now call what we now call chemistry. They were alchemists, and they were chasing Aristotle's dream. And they had the wrong theory, but worked for like over 1,000 years in the lab trying to turn base things into gold. And if it had been humanly possible, it's not possible. If it had been humanly possible, maybe they would have solved it in the first like 243 years. But it wasn't possible, and so they kept working for 1,000 years. And they got really good at lab stuff. They learned, one more slide. They got good lab technique. They got good at measuring. They got good at naming. And princes were happy to give them a little corner of the castle and some minerals and an assistant and let them keep working away, because if they could do it, free gold. That could be awesome. And they figured out how to dissolve gold. They found an acid that could dissolve gold and make gold disappear. And like, all right, we're close now. Like, we've got it now. We just need to make it come back. 200 years later, no, not quite. And they just kept grinding away in the lab, and they got really good and improved our understanding of the world a lot while they're chasing this wrong theory. What kind of word, what's another subject matter in school that begins with al? Algebra. Where was there a famous city with a great library in ancient Egypt? Alexandria. I'm going to toss one other modern al word out there. Al-Qaeda. Where are all three of those words from? The Middle East. Alchemy and all these other things are all Arabic words because that's where it went down. Okay? Because after a while we had the Greeks, and then we had the Romans, and then Europe sort of fell apart, and most of the learning happened in the Middle East for over 1,000 years. And so you look at these pictures of old alchemists, and they're wearing like Moroccan fezzes, but they're, working away on heating stuff and developing special glassware to do this magical trick that they all believed should be possible, even though it wasn't. And if you look at old European woodcuts, of alchemists, this is where like the wizard character comes from. Because they use, if they could figure out to do this, they'd be making bank, and so they don't want to reveal it. So even in their own notebooks, they'd be like, take 2 drops of moon water and mix it in a flizzle-flop. And they would know what flizzle-flop meant to them, but they didn't want to like reveal it in their notebooks. They read someone would steal it and get the recipe for gold. And so they use weird incantations and symbols is associated with them. But again, they kept working the lab. And sometimes, sometimes they would like, blow stuff up. But often they would grind away at these minerals and heat them in various things and condense them down. And again, this is this 100-year process of trying to like chase the alchemist's secret of trying to get that thing that was gold. And that's where like the wizardy sort of character in our society comes from, is like this person doing this thing to try and get this special ingredient to make gold. Again, they never did. This is just, my view is off just a little bit. It's frustrating to me. This is a graph of year versus level of science in Europe. Yeah. Just make a real rough graph. Y-axis is level of science. And you guys just lost a point over here. Y-axis is level of science. X-axis is year or date. Okay. So back in negative 500 or so, that's when we had like Aristotle was the first person to do dissections. So that was pretty good. The Romans carry the torch for a while, but then the Roman Empire falls apart, and then we have this time period. What is this low-level time period of European science called? The Dark Ages. Or sometimes called the Middle Ages. When do things start to get better? The Renaissance. When was the Renaissance? Maybe a little earlier. We're going to go like 1500s. Things start improving with the Renaissance, however that word is spelled. There's like vowels in it. Okay, so things start getting with the Renaissance. Here's the interesting thing about Renaissance to me as a word. The connotation where you guys experience the Renaissance the most is in the Renaissance Festival. Maybe your family has gone to one of those things. When you go to a Renaissance Festival, what do they do at the Renaissance Festival?
Sword fight.
They fight with swords. They joust and they eat meat on a stick. You know, none of that has anything to do with the Renaissance. Like the Renaissance is about like scholarship and perspectival painting. It doesn't have to do with swords. Swords is like the Dark Ages, but no one wants to go to like the Dark Ages festival. And if you actually went to a real Renaissance festival, you'd like go in there and watch some scribe copy books by hand. Not very fun. Like, let's go watch the scribe again, everybody. Nobody wants to do that. So they have it at the Renaissance festival when actually it's the Middle Ages festival. Let's talk about their view of the universe in the Middle Ages. In the Middle or Dark Ages, they had something called the Great Chain. Ooh, that's weird. I was going like this, and it made those lines. The Great Chain of Being. Okay? The Great Chain. Oops, hold on. The Great Chain of Being was the way that they organized the universe. Their epistemology. What was the top thing in the universe? God. What was below God? Yeah, we're down here. There's a couple layers before you're going to get to us, dude. What's in between God and humans? Angels. You're flappy with that. Angel. Okay, angels. Below the angels is maybe the heavens and like the stars, and then humans, and then the earth, and then hell. This was their like ranking of how the universe was organized. Within humans, there was a great chain of being as well. Who was at the top of the human chain of being? The king. And who was below the king? Yeah, probably, yes. Nobles or lords or dukes or barons, whatever you want to call them. All right. And then maybe the priests, and then the men, and then the women, and then the children, and then maybe the family dog. Okay, was this like hierarchy? And anybody who was higher than anybody else could just walk up and slap the person who was below them, and there was nothing you could do. Like there was a very strong patriarchy and power structure where, like, you know, a noble could totally pick on a regular person, a person could pick on his wife, and the wife could pick on the children could kick the dog when they were frustrated. Like that's just how the universe was organized. It was not a nice universe. It was not a universe of life, but there was no questioning your place in this hierarchy. There was nobody like, I'd like to be king today. That was not an option for you. Okay. What was life like for most people in this Middle Ages? Well, they lived in a thatch building, okay? And the thatch building had, like, its heat was a fire, and that was also sometimes the light. Maybe you'd get a candle, but those were pretty expensive, okay? They sometimes would bring the animals inside at wintertime, so the possibility of a cow, like, crapping on the floor inside your house is real. What is the floor of your house made of? Dirt. Okay? You are living in walls of dirt and like a roof of straw. Like, you don't know if you're going to have enough food for everybody in the family every winter. And if somebody doesn't get to eat, like, it's probably the kids, because dad's going to feed himself because it's the great shade of being. Suck it up, kids. People would sit around and fantasize, like, what would it be like if I had an egg all to myself? If I could eat a whole egg, or maybe on my birthday, I'll get a cake. Like, maybe. Like, for us, like, we had infinite cake, you know? But, like, back then, they were like, oh, the traders in town, maybe we can get some cinnamon, like, for their oatmeal. Like, because they were eating raw oatmeal every meal for, like, their lives. And so, like, cinnamon was a special treat that they would pay, like, lots of extra gold to get, some frankincense. Like, it was not a great life. So, by comparison, incredibly, especially if you lived in Italy, what is this a picture of? An aqueduct. These are people on this Roman aqueduct. It's huge. Imagine you live in a hut, okay? You live in a dirt hut over here with a thatch roof, and down the block is this massive architectural wonder of, like, marble and cement. You've got to wonder, like, where did we go wrong? You know, it's like, why is it that, like, 500 years ago, they were building this, and I live in the same room as a cow? You know, like, what happened here? And so it's like, the thing I think about is, like, if you had people, like, 1,000 years from now, some post-nuclear apocalyptic wasteland, people live on the National Mall, and they're like sheep herders, and there's the Washington Monument, like, broken 2/3 of the way up. They've got to wonder, like, why are we sheep herders when our society used to produce, like, massive monuments like this? And so as, especially in Italy, started to get its act together towards the end, towards the end of the Dark Ages in Italy, they wanted to know, like, what was going on here back in the ancient Romans. And so they would trade with the Middle Easterners, like, hey, I'm buying some spices. Can I also get one of those books? And so from the Middle East, they got books that pointed to them, like, what the Romans used to do. And if you read the Romans, who do the Romans say are actually the smartest people around that you should read? The Greeks. And so the Romans, when they read Roman books, the Romans said, go back to the Greeks. And the Greeks said, be rational and argue in this way and present your evidence thus. And that is how we got back to, like, rationality in science. We kind of lost our way for a while, but especially in Italy, there's that seeking of the rebirth of some of this classical knowledge as how they got back to some rationality. And our first big scientist of the 1500s is this red-bearded gentleman here, who is Galileo. Galileo. Right. So, Galileo. What is Galileo famous for making? The telescope. Galileo did not make the first telescope. There were a few hundred people before him that knew how to make telescopes. I think that Galileo is analogous to Bill Gates. When people look back 500 years from now, they're going to say Bill Gates invented the computer. There were, like, 500 people who knew how to make and use computers before Bill Gates, but he made them, like, everywhere and really much better. So too, Galileo made the telescope much better. And so therefore it became a very popular thing, and he became wealthy and famous for it. And they still have influence, not only his telescopes that he made, like the original ones, but they have his finger floating in fluid. Where they preserved him. So he was a math professor, interestingly, when he perfected the telescope. There almost wasn't a position of scientist back in the day. He was a professor of mathematics. He was good at figuring things out. He heard about someone else doing this thing with optics, and he figured out how to make a telescope himself. But you guys don't remember him as the first telescope guy. What did he do with the telescope that was remarkable? He looked at the stars in the heavens. And when he looked at the moon, what did he notice the moon looked like?
Round.
Nope, not round-faced dude. It had craters. It had mountains. What has craters and mountains on it? The Earth. So that means that the moon is not some pure celestial heavenly body. It's a dirty rock. Okay? And that's weird to say the moon was made of dirt, just like the Earth was. And that's a central challenge to the what? The hierarchical great chain of being. To say that something that's up here close to God is actually below us as dirt and earth is a challenge to that hierarchy. And not only that, but when he looked at Jupiter, he noticed these little flecks of light, these other stars near Jupiter, were in different places on different nights. And so therefore he said, you know what I think is happening up there? What are those little flecks of light near Jupiter? Moons. They are moons that appear to be orbiting around Jupiter. And he named them for the most wealthy and powerful people he knew so that they would be his benefactors and protect him. The Medicean moons that we still talk about today were originally discovered by Galileo. And so he discovered there's something besides the Earth that has moons. He said the Earth, smart board. Earth, not center of the universe. And all of this was challenging to the medieval hierarchy. This idea that the moon wasn't perfect, that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and most importantly, that scientific evidence would challenge established practice. Science versus tradition. And so once again, just like when the people we started with Socrates, Galileo, come on, smart board, went on trial. Okay? Galileo was hauled up in front of the Inquisition as saying, and they made him publicly recant, they made him sign a document that said the Earth does not move, it is the center of the universe, but there's supposedly, he mumbled on his breath after to do something but it still moves. I'm going to sign this, but you're not going to make me not believe it. So he still grumbled under his breath as he publicly recanted, because by publicly recanting, they just put him under house arrest for the rest of his life instead of putting him under more severe torture and things like that. The year that Galileo died in his home under house arrest is the year that the next important scientist was born. I'm going to talk more about him in the next class. Have a
I think he's a very